So now we will move to the next speaker, who is Assaf, is the co-founder of EVA. Immersive Virtual Apparel is it's a startup. It's a startup that helps game companies to incorporate fashion branded skins into games and virtual environments. Assaf is also a digital fashion pioneer, fashion designer, and official AR lens creative partner with Snapchat, with experience in luxury fashion as a designer and a creative consultant. So Assaf will represent. Yes, Asaf. He will present to us and share with us his experiences using Spark AR Studio and Lens Studio, the digital assets and the use cases of XR on the fashion industry. You will also clarify for us the intersection of AR and XR with the fashion. So you can share your screen, Asaf.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you.
Perfect.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. If it gets echoes or something, let me know and I'll put on the headphones, but probably easier like that. So, yeah, thanks a lot for having me and for Zakaria for connecting. Really happy to tell a bit about what we are doing at EVA and kind of what took me in that route from a more traditional fashion background into something that is much more digital but still encompasses fashion. I will share my screen now. Let's see. Okay. So I think that you should probably see it now, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, as I said, my name is Assaf Reeb. I'm a co-founder of EVA, which, as you said, is Immersive Virtual Apparel. I'm originally coming from Tel Aviv, Israel, which is also another exciting reason for me to participate in the evening. I will tell you a little bit about my route, and I will kind of like mix up the order of the very organized introduction that you made in terms of topics. I will explain to you a little bit about EVA and what we're doing there. But I will focus mostly on AR, and the reason to explain on EVA is to explain why digital assets are valuable and why they could become valuable in AR, and maybe that would give people some kind of appetite to work in this direction, I hope. In one line, what we're doing at EVA is enabling gaming companies to incorporate fashion skins. Skins is what an avatar is wearing in a game, into games and virtual worlds. And by virtual worlds, it means any kind of immersive environment that includes social media, AR, VR, avatar use cases, and more traditional gaming like Fortnite, the kind of very well-known example. So I'm Assaf, my co-founder Matt is in London, and we both started this company. We both have a background in fashion. So, I need to remember to switch the slides. We both have a background in fashion. Matt used to work as a digital director in a very big publishing house and in some very well-known agency working mostly with luxury brands on the digital side, while I did my career more traditionally in design. So I did my BA and my master's in fashion design. Then I worked for different brands and also created my own line of clothes. We came into this area as we really noticed how much digital and physical are merging in every kind of aspect. We're seeing younger and younger people spending more and more time in virtual environments, and how their existence in those environments is really being empowered and dictated by the kind of digital experiences that they're having. We've seen this in Fortnite, where 27 million people participated and watched actually in the Travis Scott Fortnite concert. And there has been many examples of how sorry, of how fashion and pop culture have started to merge with gaming in ways that weren't possible before. So, I mean, just to show you some articles about what's happening and how a brand like Louis Vuitton works with a game like League of Legends, this is something that a few years ago was unheard of. So luxury fashion brand would never go into this area of gaming. It was considered like, you know, uncool, maybe something that nerds are doing or geeks are doing. And I think there has been a huge change in the last few years, where on one hand, gamers became much more interested in this kind of, you know, areas of culture. And on the other hand, fashion brands became much more interested in gamers as potential consumers, but also considering the fact that so many people spend much of their time online, it's inevitable that brands that create desirable appearances for people will end up creating those desirable appearances also within people's virtual existence. So Fortnite and Nike is another example where there was a collaboration that introduced real life IP into a game. And we started looking at what happens out there, and we saw that gamers really want skins by brands, but they have very limited options available. So what that leads to is for people creating their own projects, skins that they develop themselves, which are called mods. This last summer was a huge spike in usage on a game called, sorry, I'm blacking out a little bit, but Animal Crossing Lost Horizons was like, you know, you can customize your character. People created really specific representations of the clothes that they own in real life or they would like to own in real life. And this was a huge thing. This is Grand Theft Auto. That's also things that users created themselves. They don't just show you which brands they want. They also go into fanatical detail to kind of like really emulate the kind of items that they're interested in. Fan art for Fortnite players that would like Fortnite to collaborate with Adidas and Versace, but this is not official collaborations. And digital clothes can really span thousands of platforms and different kinds of avatars. So as you can see, from something like Roblox to something more realistic like Facemoji, or even high-res things like Fortnite and PUBG, where you can really have, you know, very realistic human-like characters. Just showing some of the examples that some of our partners are working with. So this is an example for what an environment could look like. This is an example. It all looks very, very different. And I think one of the most interesting things is thinking about fashion brands and how exactly they are going to participate in this space, is how they're going to have to create different kinds of, you know, forms for what they're doing. In terms of the market size for you know, what kind of industry it is, I think a lot of people are pretty amazed to hear that gaming is bigger than music and film and books combined. It's a $180 billion industry, generating around $50 billion a year solely by selling assets. Assets meaning anything that you can buy inside the game, whether that's with in-game currency or with real currency. To augment your character, to make it look better, to change the way that your environment looks like, and so on. Gamers are also not what brands really think they are. Average age is 33, 50% college educated, 46% female, which I think is really surprising when you're thinking about the kind of cliche of what a gamer is. Usually a male teenager sitting in a basement somewhere eating pizza and playing games, but that's actually not the majority of users. The problem was that the fashion industry and the gaming industry don't really understand each other. And this is because the processes are very, very, very different. Like a character artist, the person whose job is to be basically the fashion designer for the gaming company and design the character, doesn't have drinks after work, and also doesn't, you know, work in the same techniques as a fashion designer. So they don't know each other. They don't know how to work with each other. And that's kind of like where we come in. What we're doing is trying to provide solutions to enable these kind of collaborations to happen at scale. We're doing this through a platform that we built. And our, let's say, long-term vision is that the same way that you have a fashion industry in real world, you would also have a fashion industry that exists in virtual environments. Obviously, this environment, as you saw in this previous slide with the different avatars, is very siloed, but I mean, that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve. And the reason for this all, all these like 5 minutes of explanations about what we are doing is to hint into the direction that I think that AR and fashion and the intersection between both of them is going to, and what I think is the huge potential that there is in this space. So the way that I came to fashion, starting in, the way that I came into 3D, augmented reality, and these areas from traditional fashion is in a pretty traditional route of learning the skills of sewing, pattern cutting, working with fabrics, creating clothes. And on the right, you can see a look from a fashion show that I created myself, another look. And on the left, you can see a digital render of it. So through prototyping tools, the main tools...
Assaf, can you hear us?
I can, yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello?
I think the network cut down a little bit. So, yes, you can continue, Assaf.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm hearing.
Okay, perfect. So I'll continue. I think there was a small delay. I'll get back to where I was before. Basically, I got to different kinds of tools that enable 3D prototyping of clothes and was amazed by the possibilities. So making clothes is a very unsustainable process. It's very time consuming, very material consuming. It requires factories, it requires shipping things from one place to another. And then suddenly you can create these really elaborate, images of clothes that are super realistic. But what can you do with them? This was the main question that I was asking myself. And I continued to start, just for fun, like, learning more skills around 3D, working with modeling and trying to simulate things that I liked in real life and translating them into 3D. And I try to understand how I can make this into something that is actually useful for people, because it's nice that it's a good image, but what coming from a very concrete field like making clothes for people, I kept asking myself, how can these amazing 3D renders, how can they become into something relevant? And the answer was AR. So that was around the time when puffy ears and noses started to happen on Snapchat. And I saw the link of how this could be, but it was very different from how people used it. People mostly used it as a funny thing. I was really interested in how you could make things that are connected to the industry that I was working in, which was fashion. So I took these 3D models and I started using them in Lens Studio, which is the tool that Snapchat created for content creators to upload content to the platform. You can do very simple stuff like putting glasses on. You can do much more complicated things connected to machine learning there, and much more technical things like creating, coding shaders and things like that. It's a really expensive tool in terms of the things that you can do with it. I think I went backwards. And from Snapchat, I found my way into Spark AR Studio, which is the tool that Facebook has created. Obviously, when you start having access to Instagram, things are becoming much more interesting. And I felt like I found a use case that was something that people really wanted to use. Like, you see some examples. I mean, I'm sure all of you know how filters work on Instagram and what is the potential of this. But a couple of years ago, there was none of that. Like today, you have 400,000 people developing effects for Instagram. 2 years ago, I was one of 100 people that got access to the beta on Instagram. So it's really a new thing. And thinking about how it changed how people perceive themselves and what kind of tools you have to change what you look like, I think it's really wonderful to see. And it's very much about fashion, but it's also a new thing. And I started to create filters. And from beginning with something that was based more on real life, like diamonds or studs, for example, that is kind of a reflection of a physical product, I moved into more abstract things like this one, where it is, I look at it as fashion. It changes what you look like. You can use it, but it's not something that it's not something that you can buy in the shop. So I think this developed, and at the same time, some other use cases developed, like try-ons for shoes, for example. There's a Berlin company called Viking. There's WannaKicks who are doing AR that maybe some of you have seen, where people can try on shoes, and it works really, really well. Basically, all this happened because things like face tracking, foot tracking, hand tracking became available. Like, the technology is there for many, many years, but the moment this became available on social media, it suddenly got the boom that it was waiting for. And through phones, which I think everybody was expecting for it to happen through headsets, but actually phones were what really took it into the mainstream. Now we have 2 billion people in the world using AR without even knowing that they're using AR. This is an example for a game that Burberry has created. And they also used AR Core to boost their e-commerce. So you see brands starting to use these tools to kind of like augment the e-commerce experience. This is a project that we did for Dr. Martens, putting, like helping people engage in the store in a better way and trying to let them wear the experience for a moment. And kind of like be inside of the campaign. So this is another thing that could be done. This is a project. I'm just gonna like go quickly through the things because I don't know how much time we have, but this is another project, and this is a really interesting project in terms of how augmented reality and fashion could mix. It's with a company that's based in Berlin that's called Luxo, and Luxo is creating non-fungible tokens, NFTs, on the blockchain that represent digital garments. And that gives you kind of like an ownership, a rarity, some element of value that it gives to a digital product. What we did, we created a token for these t-shirts. We created a series of 20 t-shirts, I think. On this t-shirt, there's a print, and the print triggers an augmented reality experience. So when you're pointing your camera on the person, you can see how the t-shirt becomes into something completely different. And this is truly, I think, mixed reality, because it's not exactly virtual. It's not just physical. It's a perfect combination of both, and I think we're going to see a lot of projects like this. And obviously, once AR improves and moves to headsets, we will see a lot of this even more. I can maybe show you the video just so you get a sense of what it looked like on the t-shirt. This is just on my laptop screen, but basically this is what happens when you point the camera to the t-shirt. What's going to happen in this space, and what kind of opportunities there are? I think linking digital items to physical items is something that's really, really exciting for brands. You can combine an augmented reality try-on with a gamified experience and connect that into retail. That's something that hasn't been done before, and it's really interesting. Things like Alter, which is one of the use cases that we're working with, creating kind of like face emojis avatar for people, and you can customize what they're wearing. This is already existing in Lens Studio. You already have skeleton tracking, which allows you to tie things to different points in the body of the person that you're photo shooting. It's obviously in a very basic level. Things like real-time pose estimation in Unity already exist, and I think it's not there yet in terms of dressing people in a hyper-realistic way, but it is there to the point of creating fun experiences. And that's where creativity comes into the picture, because actually the filters that you've seen before are super simple. It's not really simulating what a pair of sunglasses could look like, just making a person look more interesting. And obviously people are finding it useful. 2 billion people using it now means it's a great success, and it doesn't mean it needs to be it doesn't mean it needs to be something that's hyper realistic. It doesn't replace clothes, but it kind of like comes as another level on top.
Yes, if we could move quickly to start the Q&A session.
Sorry?
So do you, we should start the Q&A session. So
No, of
do you
course,
still
of course.
have
I mean, I think it's the last or one before the last. I mean, you could segment clothes, you could create different textures on clothes, you can change garments. This is, you can look for the hashtag, for the handle on Instagram and see who this is, because she does really interesting experimental work in AR. These are some examples for virtual clothes and the kind of use cases that you could have. I mean, this is obviously a mock-up, but I think when we come to the point where AR could do things like that in real time, that's a project that we did that could be really, really exciting, and people could take pictures of themselves wearing clothes they don't own that are completely digital. That's one of the most exciting promises of this space, but this is coming a bit ahead. I think I'm done with the deck, so I'm gonna stop that and come back
so
to you.
yes, we could move now to some questions.
Sure.
And we have the first one. So I think League of Legends has made a real connection between the two. They even made music a solid component of their success, not just fashion. What do you think about their work?
I definitely agree. I think that Riot Games, the company that owns League of Legends, the developer, they had such a breakthrough in combining pop culture and gaming. Like League of Legends is a phenomenon by itself as a gaming phenomenon, but I think the way that they brought in music artists, digital artists that don't really exist in real life, which also really relates to what we are doing. And they brought in brands from the real world that are super desirable in the real world. Like Louis Vuitton is probably like the top 3 brands in the world in terms of desirability. Virgil Abloh is now designer of their menswear. Like, to bring a brand like this into the game and to treat it as equal, I think it shows how the game industry has developed. I'm sure some people don't like it, but maybe more you know, like gamers that are there for a long time maybe feel like the industry has been hijacked. But it also brings a lot of opportunities for people, and a lot of businesses could grow around this ecosystem. So I think, yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I think it's super interesting and exciting.
So we have another question. Do you think that AR will be the future of fashion?
I think it will be. I think it will be an addition. I think some brands will never go into this space, and I think a lot of brands are already there, doing interesting things. I think that to be able to create this kind of, like the last photos that I showed you, which are super high res renders of digital garments in 3D, that are very sharp, that are very realistic, that are very, you know, that almost deceive you to think that the person really wears something. I think we're very far from this happening in AR. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think like at least 5-10 years, if not more, because the combination of problems that is there, in order to solve them, you need to make so many leaps. It's about physics being introduced in devices that cannot really support them. It's about cloth simulation that even on my powerful PC is sometimes struggling. Doing all that in real time and tracking the body, like volumetric, like shape and everything is quite difficult. But I mean, people are working on these solutions, and I know that Facebook is working on body tracking. I think they have some of the best solutions in this space, or the most interesting ones in relation to digital fashion. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that I'm not aware of that is being developed as well. So definitely, I don't think that fashion will stop being what it is and move into a completely new dimension, but I think it's definitely another facet that will sit on top of what is already there.
Yes. So we have another question. Is there any kind of copyright when you are trying to visualize the fashion stuff into a game?
Yes, absolutely. The same way that you would have with physical goods. I mean, faking something and putting a logo of a desirable brand on it is basically a crime. The brands are very jealous about their own IP, and they would, you know, they often pursue people that try to breach this IP or to use it without permission. And part of what we are doing, we're trying to make it easier for gaming developers who don't necessarily have the access to the kind of brands that we want to be introduced into this space. We're trying to make it easier for them to get access to this kind of content, license it, and create a deal that works for both sides.
We have another question. Does fashion change from game to game? If so, what are the important characteristics that you take to make a character?
Yeah, I mean, I will answer from my own point of view. Maybe like there are a few ways I can read the question, but I will answer from my own point of view. What happens to a garment when you're taking, let's say, an Armani t-shirt and you're putting it in GTA versus The Sims? Obviously, the characters are different, the proportions are different, everything is different. The technical specifications of putting this 3D model in the game are different. Sometimes the textures are different, the shaders are different. Everything works in a very different way, even though you have two hands and a body and two legs, which is also not always the case. And a whole story and narrative that places the characters in some kind of historical time or a geographical location, and everything around them corresponds with this context. I think that's part of what we are bringing, having this background in fashion, and working with luxury companies who are extremely specific about their product. Being able to take something like that and translate that into different environments is something that we're very proud of. And being able to respect the brand and respect what the brand is doing, and still being able to translate what it does from just having one product to having multiple products it's a challenge. It definitely changes between game to game. Things like proportions, being able to express the textures properly, being able to express the level of detail within the constraints, because sometimes you have a very low poly game, sometimes you have very small textures, and how do you express different things like color of stitching, for example. Sometimes it's the most important thing in the garment, but if you're not able to express that in a 3D form, because the texture is not high res enough, then you need to find other ways to express that. Yeah.
So I have a question here from a friend. He how if so since for example he has a background in fashion, how it was the transition from software to AR developer that he personally code or his team to the fashion.
I think my personal route is through 3D development. So working with, I started through tools that are being used in the fashion industry to prototype 3D clothes. There are two main softwares by the same company called Clo 3D. One of them is Clo 3D, the other is called Marvelous Designer, which is more common in the gaming industry. And that's something that for someone who knows how to make clothes is pretty straightforward. From that, that's not enough to put things in a game. So you would need to learn some skills in Maya or Blender, which is a free tool, on character design, on rigging, on skinning. I mean, there is a lot of stuff to learn in 3D, but it's really fun if you're a visual person, if you're coming from design, if you're coming from fashion. The options are so much wider when you're working purely digitally, because you don't have to buy materials, you don't have to limit yourself how many meters of fabric you're going to work with, you don't need to go to look for a seamstress. You can essentially create everything from your own laptop, which I think is very empowering for young designers. And it's definitely doable. Like, I'm the proof. I had a completely different training, and I found my way to this space through interest and kind of experimenting and self-teaching myself. So everything is online, and all the information is available. So yeah, it's definitely possible.
The last question, if you can answer it quickly. So when you make a new model or design, or you develop an app, do you patent it? If yes, what is the procedure?
So I would separate it between the kind of solution that we're developing, where we aim to create unique IP, which is unique for us. In terms of creating the models, yes, there is an IP element, but the IP element is always owned by the brand. The brand is always the owner of the IP, and whether or not the brand chooses to license this IP, it's not about patenting so much. As a default in anything creative, there is a copyright element. Some brands can patent different elements of what they're doing. You could register a trademark or a name or a logo or something like that. And that's something that the big brands obviously do, and they have in-house lawyers on retainer, chasing people that try to breach those things. But essentially, it's not for us to patent a design. It's more about developing tools that would make this process easier. Is definitely something that we are focused on, and that's where we are creating our own IP.
So thank you, Assaf, for your great presentation and for sharing knowledge and your experiences with the fashion. So now we move to Mohamed.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.